Do you believe your business can be a force for good? Maybe you've already given back to your community or a cause that you really care about. Or maybe it's something that you've been dreaming about doing. Here's the thing. Most small and medium-sized businesses doing good are keeping it a secret. But what if your generosity could also boost your brand, attract loyal customers, and build a team that's proud to stand beside you? I'm Kirrily Graham, and this is Business as a Force for Good, the podcast where we shine a light on business owners just like you who are making an impact and growing their business. Each week we dive into real stories, real challenges, and the powerful results that come from aligning purpose with profit, because doing good is good for business. So I'm really excited for today's guests. We're going to be speaking with Catherine Brooks of Equitable Philanthropy, which is a bit of a mouthful, but an awesome business. And why I'm excited about this is because it's such an important conversation, I think, and it's something that we need to sort of debunk some myths about, isn't it? So I think a lot of people think that we need to be really wealthy or millionaires before we become philanthropists, but it's really not the case. So it's really great to have you here, Catherine. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great to have you here. So tell us a little bit about your business, because you're already in the world doing some good work in the business that you have, but you have made your business a force for good at another level as well. So can you tell us a little bit about your business, how it came to be, and the sort of work that you do?
Yeah, fantastic. So I established Equitable Philanthropy just at the start of this year, January 2025. So we're 6-7 months in now, and it's been a fantastic journey. I'm really privileged and fortunate to be in this space because of my mother, Wendy Brooks, who is a very, very well-known fundraiser and fantastic operator in the space. So I'm leveraging off some amazing relationships and connections and skills that she has given me, which I'm very grateful for. At Equitable Philanthropy, we position ourselves as a place where funders can find impact and charities can find partners. So we're quite unique in the sense that we act for both sides. Funders contact us and say, we would like to give, we would like to do more, we would like to create impact, and they have the funding and finances to be able to do that, but they're not often sure where they should give to, who they should give to, how they should make the most impact. So we work with those organisations or foundations or funders, they might be individuals, to identify where does their passion lie, how do they want to create impact, and we assist them set up their giving vehicle, their giving strategy, and engage their whole family as part of that philanthropic process. Then on the other side, we represent charities or not-for-profits who come to us and say, we need alternative income streams. We need to generate more income to do more good and to continue the great work that we're doing. But often they don't know how to attract that funding in. So we work with organisations to develop their funding strategy, complete a due diligence report and assessment so they know if they're ready to seek investment from different market segments. And then we actually become their implementers. We assist them fundraise in the different market segments that they want to attract funding in from. So in that basis, we work with a charity for over 6 months, it might be more, to actually test out what is working, what is resonating with funders, what's attractive to funders, teach the CEO and chair how to deliver the pitch, how to create those relationships with funders. And that's a really fantastic process to work alongside a charity with.
Yeah, and that's really great where you're teaching them to fish effectively, isn't it?
So it is similar to that concept. Yeah, it's fantastic. And sometimes funders will actually pay for our work because they will say, we love a particular charity, but we can see they have gaps in, for example, strategic planning or strategic fundraising. And that's an amazing opportunity for us to partner with that funder, go into the charity, provide our capacity building services and equip those charities with what they need.
Yeah, and that's something that, you know, we're very passionate about as well in regards to helping those charities to develop their capacity and capability. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on, which is fabulous. But it's really interesting that a lot of the things that you're talking about, the things that funders are looking for in regards to choosing which sort of charity, making sure they're aligned, you know, to the sort of causes that they care about, really, really similar to the work that we do in Dovetail as well and the conversations that we're having with business owners. So that just really points to, I suppose, there's a real a lot of lack of knowledge, isn't there, about how the charity sector works and who's doing the good work and how are they doing that?
Yeah, so my partner always says wherever there's money, there's fraud, and wherever there's that going on, there's a situation around trust. And I think there's a lot of people in Australia that want to give and hesitate to give because they're not sure that by giving it's going to create impact.
Yes.
So I really see our role, both at Dovetail and Equitable Philanthropy, around demystifying what is philanthropy, building up that test and trust process with the leadership that are running the charities, doing the due diligence process that we both do to build up that trust and try and provide reassurance or relationship so that you can establish better situations where money can change hands and people understand and feel that their money is going to make an impact. Yeah. And, there is a problem in the charity sector around people's ability to do good donor stewardship. And what I mean by that is how to build those relationships, how to thank funders that have donated. And it's a really important piece of the puzzle because we know if it costs 7 times more to attract a new donor in than it does to just look after our existing donors. So we really need to get better at thanking, engaging, acknowledging, recognizing our current donors, building that trust. And then I know more of your small to medium-sized businesses will be really passionate about contributing, but sometimes you've got to start small, you've got to build that trust, and then they'll look at really diving in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's that whole point of just getting started in the journey, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So my mother has a very good saying, philanthropy is a muscle you have to flex. The more you flex it, the more you realize, oh, that feels pretty good. It's just like exercise. You realize you can do something. Maybe you can run a little bit further. And I think philanthropy is the same. Everyone has to start somewhere. And the more you start dipping your toes in the water, the more you realize how good it feels, how engaged you can be in certain communities or certain areas of focus. And then you can factor in, oh, actually, I could distribute a little bit more, or my business could do more, or maybe my employees want to do more as well. And how do we do that and how do we engage with them? So, I think philanthropy is something. And the other thing I always say is philanthropy should be fun. It should be joyful. So people often ask me, how do we know who we should give to, how we should get involved, what areas of focus? And obviously it needs to be cause aligned. What's of interest to you? What's meaningful to you and your family or to your business? Often businesses have an employee that's experienced something and they want to support that person. But at the end of the day, you've also got to find joy and fun and excitement. Giving should be a joyful act and it should be exciting. So it's also about working out what's going to be of interest to you, and that will be different for everyone. Yeah.
And I think also too that and it's a little bit in the Australian psyche where even doing that can be not so much guilt, but just like it's something that is very private and they don't feel like they can feel good about it. It's a bit of an odd thing that I hear quite often where speaking to people, and if they do give, they still tend to keep it quiet and on the lowdown. But it is something that can be really shared.
It absolutely can be. I think we're seeing more of that in relation to intergenerational wealth, so the transfer of intergenerational wealth that's happening now and will continue to happen over the next 20 years. And a lot of the family offices that I work with are utilising philanthropy to engage with their next generation, so bringing the kids into the fold. It can be a really good way to test the waters around management of finances, so it can be a really good way to engage younger cohorts. But I think too, when I have donors that are reticent about being acknowledged, maybe it's on a website, maybe thanking them at an event, if I explain to them why we want to acknowledge them, which is beyond them and, furnishing their ego, it's also about inspiring and encouraging others to give, because we know and statistics show that when you talk really loudly and proudly about your giving, it inspires and encourages others to give. So it's really important, if you can, to talk about your giving, not as a bragging right, but it's really important that we distribute our wealth. And that's why I called Equitable Philanthropy, because, I think we know fundamentally that our society is going to be a better place when we're sharing our wealth, when we're sharing our privilege. And at the end of the day, as I said, it is fun. It's a joyful way of being a part of a community. Yeah,
exactly. And that's precisely why we're doing this podcast as well, to inspire more people to do that. So look, before we get into the sort of nuts and bolts around philanthropy, you've also got aspects of your own business. Your business does good work already, but there are other aspects that you also bring to your business in regards to giving back. Could you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, certainly. I'm certainly running a for-profit, but that doesn't mean it can't be for purpose. Yes. So the work that I do, I'm very lucky because I don't need to find or seek out my purpose. My purpose is really to try and assist find funders that want to match with the charities that I'm working for. So that's very purpose-driven. But on top of that, and I think it's very important to demonstrate that I myself give back and the business is a contributor. So we do that through a range of ways. There's the 1% pledge, which all organisations can sign up to. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to give 1% of your profits in cash. It can also be in other ways, such as in-kind support. But for me, making a donation is a simpler way. I'm also a proud member of a number of donor circles and giving circles. So there's the P500, which is a Geelong Community Foundation giving circle that I'm a member of. There's about 260 of us now that are from Geelong or have some connection in Geelong where we all contribute $500 a year, and that means we can pool our funds and distribute back into the community a grant of about $80,000 every year, which is a substantial amount to a charity. That is an amazing community-led organisation headed up by Amy Waters, who's a fantastic Geelong-based female leader, and it's really fantastic to be part of that process. I've also assisted a number of organisations establish donor circles. So the difference between a giving circle is where we pool our funds and we choose who to distribute the funds out to, which charities to distribute it out to, whereas a donor circle is owned and controlled by the specific charity. So we've just helped establish a donor circle for Monkey Bar, which is a children's theatre company, and I'm really proud to be the founding member of that Monkey Bar Melbourne-based donor circle. It means that what we can do is pool our funds to really try and increase who gets to access and go to theatre. We just did a really fantastic partnership with Berry Street and Uber where we were able to offer free theatre tickets and get those families to the theatre so that kids that might not otherwise have ever seen the theatre and being a part of that amazing live arts performance got to actually witness that. So, that's another way at Equitable Philanthropy we try and work out how can we give back and contribute through our leadership, but also you've got to put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I love about things like those giving circles is that it's the collective that brings so much power if we all just contribute that little bit. But the collective of it is really, really powerful.
That's true. And I think for some people, particularly as we were talking about before, you've got to dip your toes in the water first.
Yeah.
So if you sign up to be a Giving Circle member, for example, there's another one, Melbourne Women's Fund, which is a fantastic option as well. There's lots of different ones out there, another one, Impact 100. But if you think about it from a monthly contribution perspective, if it's $500 a month, $500 a year is only $45 per month. So if you can think about what you might like to be a part of, test the waters, put it into your budgeting, I think a lot of people will find it's a lot more accessible to start your path and journey in philanthropy. And then what I find is through those Giving Circle events, you get to learn a lot more around what an organisation is doing. You get to meet the leadership, and that's when you might decide, actually, you know what, I would like to give a $10,000 check to that particular project or to support that particular cause. So it's a really good educative way to get a sense of what's happening in your community. Yeah,
fantastic. And that's perfect segue into that next part around, talking about some of the myths that exist around philanthropy. So tell us a little bit around how you see philanthropy and how that can be, from anybody really.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing to have a think about terminology. So philanthropy can sometimes be seen as a bit of a hoity-toity upper class word. And we certainly don't want that to be the case because at the end of the day, the actual meaning of the word philanthropy is love of humankind. So if we break it down to what it means and then think about it's just people wanting to give back and to contribute back. I mean, other terminology that some people do and don't like, funder is a term that I use a lot, but not many people call themselves a funder. Donor is another term. Yeah. But anyone is a philanthropist. You give $1 or more, you've already become a philanthropist. And it's really interesting. I've got 4 children and it's really interesting to learn from them. What do they think about philanthropy? And apart from how cute it is getting them to say it so that we can laugh at how they pronounce it, I think they're becoming a lot more across what is philanthropy because they're seeing a lot of YouTube givers really give back in this philanthropy world. So it's been really interesting. And we've had a massive increase in philanthropy through cryptocurrency. So, the kids are getting involved, the YouTube gamers are getting involved. I think there is a bit of disruption in that space, but basically anyone that is distributing $1 or more can call themselves a philanthropist. And I think we should be really proud about saying, that you're a proud contributor to certain organisations. Yeah.
And again, outside of cash donations, there's philanthropy can also include other ways of giving, can't it?
That's so true. So obviously with a lot of charities, in-kind support can be incredibly helpful. And I know you've got many SMEs that you work with that are able to contribute business modelling or graphic design work. Even one of the things that we really, really appreciate is office space. So I've got a number of charities that need a few desks, and that might be something that now people are working flexibly. There might be capacity for some of your small to medium-sized businesses to offer. The other thing too, we often work with financial institutions and advisors to provide boardroom spaces to put on events, because it can be very helpful for a charity to have a space, a lunch provided, wine and cheese afternoon provided for them to be able to engage with their donors and their community. So there's lots of different ways organisations can help. But I do have to say at the end of the day, cash is queen, as I like to say, because we need to build up, my recommendation is to build up trust and rapport with a charity. And if you can, give them untied funding. By that I mean give them cash and trust them to know where the money should go and what they should use it for. Yeah. And if you haven't yet got that trust, I would recommend to continue to build up the relationship, get to know more about the organisation and what they need. And if you need to start with material gifts, such as, buying a washing machine so that they can have a laundry service or whatever that might be, that's great. But then really be thinking about how can we make the biggest impact? And for most charities, it's going to be via cash.
Yeah, absolutely. But I see that a lot, that there are a lot of professional services that can be so valuable, because there are a lot of things like having a great photographer or videographer, like you said, venue hire, those sorts of things that they normally couldn't and wouldn't pay for. Can make an incredible difference, and they can really leverage like great photography for their websites and, annual reports and all that sort of stuff is so critical.
Absolutely. And I shouldn't forget where we're sitting right now and the amazing officers of Press Room Philanthropy who do an amazing job in providing print and graphic design support. So you're right. Those sorts of things are very, very helpful. Yesterday I was actually just on a call with a small charity who's setting up a donor circle, and they're hosting a launch event. And there was a board member on the call, and they were saying, we might have to sell tickets to be able to pay for the launch event. And I said, what's the cost? What are you hoping the cost to be for this event? And the CEO said $5,000, and the board member said, don't worry, my company will sponsor that. And so that's an incredible weight off that CEO's shoulders to be able to put on this event, not ask anyone to pay, and to be able to launch something that's going to be really meaningful for that charity. So what an amazing board member, talking about putting your money where your mouth is. But she didn't know that was a need. So, really understanding from a charity perspective, what do you need, and then trying to match where there might be those businesses that can provide those services would be great. Yeah,
fantastic. And you've talked before about the value of bringing your children into this as well. So, and that intergeneration is happening now. But talk to me a little bit around how you see people can, include family and particularly starting at a young age.
Yeah, I think it's so, so important that we teach our children the importance of giving back, particularly those of us that are privileged. And when I use this word privilege, I don't necessarily mean we have millions of dollars to distribute. I mean all of us that are in Australia, we are able to send our children off to a good school, even if it's a public school like my boys go to. We're in a position where we might have a little bit of disposable income. And I think it's a fantastic mentality to be able to teach our kids about the sharing of wealth and the joy that can come with that. So I know at school they do a great job of teaching kids different charities, and they do, some fundraising themselves. But I think if we can find charities and volunteering opportunities to bring our kids into the fold and teach them about different experiences that people have, then it can be a really good way to start them on that journey. But it can be tricky to find something appropriate. So I really often encourage charities to think about what might they be able to do to bring the next generation into the fold. At the moment, I'm working with this amazing national charity, and we're about to launch an intergenerational women's donor circle, because I have in my mind grandmothers that would like to bring their granddaughters into the fold.
Oh, beautiful.
Often it's the middle-aged mothers that don't have the time and capacity and resources, but the grandmothers really want opportunities to engage with their granddaughters. So think about some amazing, if you're listening from a charity, think about some amazing events and how you can bring your donors and community into the fold. But from a SME, small to medium-sized business, think about what are the opportunities out there that might be palatable and available to bring your kids in so that they can see and be really proud that you're donating, your business is donating. And that's why things like walkathons, I think we're talking about the 4 fun runs. I know there's some organisations that provide food relief and the kids can get involved in packing lunches, writing little notes for people that might need that. So, thinking about those ways to engage kids, because we know that the sooner you start your philanthropy journey, actually someone was telling me a stat yesterday, your first charity that you support, you're much more likely to stay with for your whole life because that connection resonates with you. So think about what's going to be meaningful to your children. I've got a stepdaughter who's very passionate about horses. So we're looking at how can we, support a charity in that space. I've got another child who's interested in gaming. So looking at what are the YouTube platforms that are aligning with Friday Victoria, who's one of our charity partners, and they're doing really innovative work in that space. So thinking about tapping into your kids' interest areas and then how can you bring them into the mix when it comes to your philanthropic giving. Yeah,
fabulous. Now, there's another thing that, when we caught up beforehand, you were talking about the 6 T's. Now, I thought there was like 3 or 4 T's, but you're saying there's 6 T's. So tell us about those 6 T's of philanthropy.
Yeah, it's such an interesting concept. In America, when you're on a board, the rule of thumb is the 3 G's. You've got to give, get, or get off the board. So there's a big culture of philanthropy and giving in America. And it's a very different culture in Australia.
Yeah, it is.
In America, people are very loud and proud about saying, I donate. And I've heard that if you go to a dinner party, you sort of sit down and the first thing you do is say who you're associated with and where you're giving goes. And so people are very loud and proud about their giving. Because of the tall poppy syndrome in Australia, it's certainly not like that. And so when I work with boards, we talk about the 4 T's. You're right, there was only 4. The Americans have now added 2 more, so I'll take you through each of those. But I find it's actually culturally much more appropriate for board members here in Australia and people thinking about their giving journey because the way in which the 4 or 6 T's are broken down, it's around tapping into where you think your strengths are. And often people will say to me, I could never be a fundraiser because I could never make the ask.
Yes.
And I always say to those people that is absolutely fine. Only those that feel comfortable making the ask should make the ask. You should be really proud to be able to say, this is my charity, this is my organisation, this is how much we need to do good. If you don't feel like that, then that's absolutely fine, but there's other ways you can contribute. So the 4 original T's, and then I'll tell you the 2 extra ones, is talent, time, ties and treasure. So talent, obviously, how can you look at, and from an SME perspective, how can you look at supporting a charity? And through your talent, you might be able to offer things such as graphic design support or other professional services that you can provide. Time, it's actually really, really helpful for charities to have volunteers, and there's a huge need for volunteers at the moment. We had a big drop-off post-COVID.
That's right.
So volunteering time is very, very helpful, but also time on a board. So if you are really passionate about a charity and you can see that they don't have a full board or the full remit of what a board should have.
And they love diversity, don't they? Diversity is really great.
Diversity is very important, particularly for funders. So they want to see diversity of gender, but also diversity of ethnicity, diversity of lived experience, really, really important. Yeah. So I often say if you're thinking about talent and time, think about how you can contribute at board or leadership level. And then you've also got ties. Now, ties means your connections. So if, for example, there's a a charity that you're supporting and they've got a fun run coming up or a ball, that charity is going to be wanting to get as many people along to that event as possible. So utilizing your ties, that's your connections, bring other people into the mix. And I love saying that I'm a P500 Giving Circle member of the Geelong Community Foundation. We've got an event coming up. I'm a proud donor. Come along to this event. You can learn more around what we do. It's a fantastic thing for me to invite people along to. And then when those people come along, they go, if Catherine can donate $45 a month, I can too. Yeah. And then they can join. So the ties and connections is really, really important. And then the final 4 of the initial 4 was treasure. money. At the end of the day, as I said, charities really need cash and they need your support, but it's working out how you can contribute and what kind of treasure you can provide. And if you're on a board, we do say that at least some board members need to give back to the charity because it's, showing money where your mouth is. And then you can say to other funders, join me, I'm donating as well and I'm on the board. So it's a really important part of being a board member. Now, the other two that the Americans have added are trust and testimony. I think that trust and testimony can be incorporated into those top four, but they've specifically pointed them out. So trust is a really important one. If you say to your friend, I know this CEO of this charity, I've worked with them or I've donated to them for many years, maybe I did a fun run with them, I've been out and done some volunteering, then your friend is also going to be more likely to trust that organisation. So that builds the trust and rapport and would increase that potential for donations and success. Exactly. So trust is really important. Also think about how you can, and this feeds into the last one, testimony. How can you tell people that you trust and support that organisation? So testimony really talks to, as we were saying before, being loud and proud about our giving, not so that we get a pat on the back, but to encourage and inspire others to give. So I love speaking on LinkedIn, for example, about the charity partners that I'm working with or who I'm donating to, because that adds an element of trust and also provides more exposure to that charity and it gives people awareness that it's an opportunity they could support too.
Yeah. And I think that it relates back to the ties, right, around the networks and the community that person has. But I think that in itself is a really, really powerful one when you think about business networks and when people are talking about, the relationship they may establish with their charity partner, that for a lot of those smaller charities, that's gold, isn't it? Because we have so many small but amazing charities, but no one's ever heard of them.
That's so true. We have over 60,000 charities in Australia, so it's very difficult. And there's a fantastic book that's just been released by my friend Kevin from the US called Fundable and Findable. Yes. So we need to make sure that as charities we're fundable and findable. And if we've got supporters that can help with that testimony piece, we're going to be more findable, but we also need to make sure we're backing that up with our presence on LinkedIn, showing impact, showing what we're doing. So it takes both sides to really do that work.
It does. And so you work both with the sort of smaller charities as well as some of the larger ones. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that's like, the difference between how for smaller charities, how important this is in the work that you do versus what it's like working with some of the bigger charities?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. You'd think there'd be a bigger difference than there actually is, or different needs. So some people are surprised that I, on some hand, work with national charities because some of those national charities have a 30-plus fundraising team. So they think, why would they need you? But sometimes the needs are the same in the sense that there'll be a special project or gap where they'll need assistance. So it might be, for example, a Gifts in Wills program that they need assistance with, or help to establish a donor circle to engage with their major donors. So that's normally how I work with the larger charities on those special projects. And I do a lot of training and due diligence with those national charities as well to identify any gaps that they might have, and then they can do the implementation work. Smaller charities are normally the ones that I work with, they won't have their own internal fundraising resource, but the CEO is doing a lot of the asking and the fundraising themselves, and they just need some additional support to make sure that they're doing what is right, that the work that they're spending their time and energy on gets best return on investment. So for a smaller to medium-sized charity, the help that they'll normally need is around strategy and then the implementation piece. So it might be strategic planning. How do we demonstrate that we know what we're doing and that we've got a plan? How do we then develop our funding strategy that underpins that strategic plan? So we've got a really good strategic plan or lots of ambition, but how are we going to fund it to actually get there? And if you're small to medium-sized business owners, they're strategic. They're business people. They have had to develop their own business plans. They will be encouraged to see that charities have that plan and they've got that wherewithal to seek funding on that purpose. So these are the types of important things that funders do want to see, that there's a plan in place and a strategy in place. Yeah. So normally it's that type of work, and then hopefully we can get some really good catalytic funding in the door for the smaller to medium-sized charities. And by that I mean, it might be $100,000 for 3 years committed so that they can hire the next, big role that they really need that person to to grow their charity. That's sort of the investment they're seeking.
Yeah, and what's great to see is that that's really shifting now, isn't it? That a lot of funders are willing to invest in the capacity building of these smaller charities, because it's great if you've got the strategy, but if you haven't got the resources to deploy that strategy, then, there's not much point in having a great strategy. So, yeah, have you seen that sort of shift?
Definitely seeing more and more of it. I think there's a lot of people that will say, oh, but I saw on the report they're paying their CEO, $100K or $200K. And then it's such a good response to be able to say, oh, how much do you get paid? Why do we expect charities who are solving our toughest societal problems to take so much less when we know how hard they're working? And, again, it's around that trust and building that trust up. But I think more and more funders are understanding, particularly when it comes to service delivery, we then have to pay for the delivery of that service. And who does that? Staff do that. We need people on the ground to do it. But it is tough to get untied funding. We know in the trust and foundation space, so the Maya Foundation are a fantastic exception to this rule, because they provide funding in line with an organisation's strategy and strategic plan. They don't provide tied funding, but 90% of the trust and foundation space still require the funding to be distributed in a project tied manner, which means we have to say exactly how and what that money is going to be spent on, which makes it pretty tricky for a charity, because you're sort of retrofitting your budgeting and your costs to fit in with a trust and foundations grant process. But that 10% of trusts and foundations that provide untied funding are incredibly valuable, and we thank them 1,000 times for the funding and support they give charities.
It's great to see that there is that shift there happening, though. It's really great. So one of the things that you do with your funders is actually doing the due diligence, on behalf of charities. So this is something I hear all of the time. It's one of the first things that people say. I was like, which charity do we choose? Because there's such an abundance of them. And that's part of the service you offer as well. So tell us a bit about, what's your recommendations when people don't come to you or I for that? How do people decide and do their own due diligence on charities that they want to support?
Yeah, fantastic question. So we actually developed our own due diligence checklist and then released that, so it's free to the public. It's on our Equitable Philanthropy Substack. It's only a 7-part process, and you can print it out, download it in a Word doc, and you can think about the charity that you're wanting to support and try and answer the questions, or send it to them and say, can you fill out this due diligence process? Because if you've got that basic information, then you're really ticking off on the fundamentals, which are good governance, the financials are solid, or at least there's a plan of increasing those financials. You're comfortable in relation to leadership. That's really key. People fund people. At the end of the day, you might be, interested in an organisation because it's as part of your giving strategy. It aligns to a cause that you're interested in. But at the end of the day, I find people really will only hand over that check if they really appreciate and trust the people in leadership, whether it's the CEO or the chair. Yeah. So really having a look at those fundamentals, and I always think too, if you're looking at a charity's data, particularly through the ACNC website, which provides very good summary overview, if you can't make sense of that information, that can often be a bit of a red flag for me, because it means the charity hasn't been able to position what it does in a way that gives me comfort. And it might be that they're very green and that they need a bit of support in that space. And if you've got that ability to help them, that's fantastic. But you really should be able to see, based on their financials, where it is that their money's going based on the activities that they do. So I think particularly business people have a very good sniff test and can do some of that work themselves. But then I think the second best thing is to pick up the phone and speak to the CEO, because it's just like with dating. You can work out pretty quickly within the first sort of 5 minutes, is this someone that we think is running a good operation?
Yeah.
And do they genuinely care? Are they genuinely committed? And do they understand and appreciate me as a potential donor and how much we can contribute? You'll get a pretty good sense from a quick squiz on the ACNC, understanding those financials, and then speaking to leadership, I think will give you a good overview. And
if for those that may not be able to, because a lot of CEOs of smaller charities are, they're quite under-resourced and under-pump. Other ways that they can actually, do their due diligence probably a little bit more from not so much a distance, but other ways that they could sort of observe social media and websites are often a good guide, but other ways that they could potentially interact with the charities?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, one thing would be to look at the board. Every charity should have board profiles, and you should be able to get a sense of the board members as to the standing within the community, and you can reach out to those board members as well. The other thing I always suggest to look at is on a charity's website, you should have an Our Supporters list. And so if there are other funders or donors that have supported that charity, that can provide you with a bit of comfort as well. So, for example, if a charity has received funding from Maya Foundation or Paul Ramsey Foundation, those organisations do a lot of due diligence before they give. So there's obviously been some element of comfort and, they've passed some, level of test for that donor to be supporting them. So that's something really important to look at. There might also be corporate partners. And so if you knew anyone else that was donating, you could speak to them and say, hey, I'm thinking about contributing. I can see you were a donor. What has your experience been like?
Yeah.
And as you say, it might be that the CEO hasn't called them every week to give them an update, but they should have some sense of that leadership and feel comfort in who's running that organisation.
Yeah, that's great. And quite often there's opportunities, isn't there, to perhaps volunteer with them and actually interact with the other volunteers and team.
Yeah, absolutely. But as you say, it shouldn't take a huge amount of time, and I appreciate business owners might not have that much time to do the due diligence. So, yeah, really looking at the socials, the public-facing information that you can should help to give you a good sense.
Yeah, fantastic. So just before we wrap up, I'd love to kind of get from you what would be the sort of the key things that you think are really important in that from being being or becoming a philanthropist. One of the things that we discussed was it's really hard to make an impact from a shaky ground. I loved that what you shared with me before, but you had a lot of really amazing stats with a recent article that you wrote for the community directors, the company community directors article. And is there any sort of like real gold nuggets that you would like to share, statistics, things like that you'd like to leave people with?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we know that a huge percentage of our smaller sized charities are heavily reliant on donations from individuals and businesses, not government. So a lot of the big funding from federal and state government goes to the larger organisations, and a huge amount of general funding goes to the big guys like the Heart Foundation and Beyond Blue. And I'm not saying they don't do good work, but if you want to make a big impact, I would look at supporting a smaller organisation, but understanding what it is that they really need. And when I wrote that article around we need to support the fundamentals and the foundations of charities so that they can continue to do good work, what I'm really encouraging donors to think about is what capacity building support does a charity need? So, it's like the teach a man to fish component. If they have good marketing, they can get their name out there. They have good graphic design, good photography, more people can find out about them. If the CEO feels supported because they have a strategic plan, they have a good board, they're going to be able to create greater impact. Yeah. So the work that you and I do in building these charities, capacity is super, super important, but not often funded. So if you're thinking about supporting a charity, please think beyond the specific projects, because the charity needs funding to deliver to the people that they're working for, but they also need funding to run an organisation. And if they're constantly going back to the wheel seeking funding and the money that they're getting in goes directly straight out, then they're not going to be around for very long because they just can't keep that core operations going. And we need to be able to pay to keep the lights on. So again, thinking creatively and asking those questions to the charity leaders, what is it that would be helpful, would be a really good starting point to assess where you might start your philanthropy. Yeah,
that's right. And I think we tend to put the same standards on charities, small and large, in regards to how much they spend on their operational costs or admin or whatever that is. But when you're a smaller charity, and I think most small to medium-sized businesses would get this, that you really are a jack of all trades when you start a business and you're a small business. You wear so many hats, and that you do have to actually invest to scale and grow your team. So I think there's a good understanding, of what that would be like for a smaller charity from smaller business owners, but they don't necessarily think like that about charities, as, that they are a business that require that sort of investment and need to be able to get that money in to help scale their operations and do the branding and the marketing and build their team.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's if I think about my favourite charities, they're often the ones where I know the CEO will turn every dollar into $3 of impact. And how do they do that? They're just like the SMEs, the scrappy, I'm a startup as well. Yeah. You've got to work out what's my good tech stack, what technology can I utilize. I'm very passionate about AI in fundraising at the moment because I think it's really changing the landscape and saving the time of, CEOs, marketing, comms people, and then really making sure that it's providing donors with better information and intel. But, I think, looking at those CEOs, the other thing I think our small to medium-sized businesses are really attracted by, and there's a fantastic tech report, a tech giving report that's just been released. So I just did an interview with Antonia Raffaella on Start Giving, and she's just released an amazing report on this, which shows that tech founders are 20% more likely to give than the average person in Australia. So thinking about our small to medium-sized business who are often also very innovative and in the tech space, how can you then align with a charity that might have those similar values as you do, or how can you help them think in a really innovative way? But I know, for example, you've got We Are Mobilise that you partner with. They were one of my clients. They're very innovative. They're happy to fail fast. They just want to make a difference and show change. So they're trying things that other people haven't tried, and that's very attractive, I think, to small to medium-sized businesses.
Yeah, and it is quite unique, I think, in the space as well because for the founders of that, they came from a sort of very business background and really brought a lot of their business skills to the charities. And I find that a lot of smaller charities that I've dealt with, they've mainly came from that lived experience and haven't run a business before and don't have that business experience and can have a very different view, about how it should operate. And it has to be very lean and you have to get everything pro bono and we can't spend money. And that really does have their foot nailed to the floor.
Yes, so it can narrow their impact, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's another really good thing if you're considering your giving journey. What are the values that you want to align with? So if it's innovation, if it's doing things differently, if it's creativeness, then think about, okay, well, who are those charities that meet that? Yeah. And even doing an assessment of your website, even asking chat, which charities in our area are doing really innovative work and really trying to look at the different options that exist out there.
Yeah. So many to choose from and so many opportunities.
There definitely are.
Yeah. It's been really fabulous. Thank you for sharing all of your expertise and your knowledge. You can see you're very, very passionate about it, and I love that you're, very much focused on building the capacity, of some of these organisations as well. Very much needed. As we're saying, a lot of them come into this and really have no idea what they're getting themselves into. So it's really great work that you're doing. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you so much for having me, and congrats on all of your work. And thanks to those business owners that are already giving back. We appreciate you.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. So we hope that you've been inspired by what you've heard today, or at least a bit curious about how you can make your business a force for good. You can reach out for a no-obligation discovery call with us at Dovetail. And if you have a question about something that we spoke about today, or if you have an idea that you'd like us to cover, you can visit our podcast page and leave us a voice message, and I'll respond to that in one of our upcoming episodes. We would love it if you enjoyed today's episode to jump on and follow the podcast and give us a review, or share it with another business owner who you think might be inspired to make their business a force for good. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next time.